Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, belief, and the afterlife. Tariq Ibrahim was a devoted Muslim living in Houston, Texas. His life revolved around his faith, praying 5 times a day, fasting during Ramadan, and attending mosque services with his community. Tariq was known for his strong belief in Allah and the teachings of the Qur'an. He lived with his wife, Amina, and their 2 children, and his closest friends, Idris and Zainab, were always by his side, sharing in the same faith. Life was predictable, and Tariq felt secure in his understanding of the world. But deep down, there were moments of doubt, the smallest flickers of uncertainty that he couldn't shake off. They were thoughts that seemed too dangerous to entertain, questions that might jeopardize everything he had built his life around. But everything changed when an unexpected near-death experience forced him to confront his beliefs head-on, and what he discovered on the other side would flip his world upside down. The journey from disbelief to faith, from darkness to light, was about to unfold in the most profound way. Let's dive in. Hello, my name is Tariq Ibrahim. I was always a man of reason. My faith in Islam was something I held deeply, a belief forged in the heart of my family and community. My days were routine, spent working at a tech firm in Houston, balancing the demands of my job with my role as a husband to Amina and a father to Zainab and Idris. But there was always something in the back of my mind, a subtle unease I couldn't shake. I never questioned the truths I had been raised with. I simply accepted them, as we all did in our circle. But little did I know, this certainty was about to be shattered in a way I never could have imagined. It started with a routine morning, getting up early, offering my prayers, and heading out to work. But that day, something was off. I felt an odd pressure in my chest, a heaviness that I couldn't explain. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just stress. But as the day went on, the pressure intensified. By the afternoon, my vision blurred, and my heart began to race uncontrollably. The next thing I knew, I collapsed. I was dead. I didn't know how I knew, but the absence of sound, the stillness, was unmistakable. For a brief moment, there was no pain, no fear, only an overwhelming sense of calm. I wasn't aware of anything specific, just a deep, profound silence. Then, slowly, a light began to appear in front of me. It wasn't like any light I had seen on Earth. It was brilliant, pure, and inviting. My mind tried to make sense of it, but all I could do was draw closer to it, almost as if it was pulling me in. And then I saw him. I can't describe him fully because words simply fail. But it was Jesus. His presence radiated warmth, compassion, and an overwhelming sense of peace. I had heard of him, of course, but in the context of my Muslim faith, he was merely a prophet, a revered figure, but not divine. But as I stood there, facing him, I knew this was no ordinary meeting. This was the Son of God, standing before me. His eyes met mine, and I could feel the love pouring out of them. It wasn't just an emotion, it was an essence, a force that was more real than anything I had ever known. I was no longer worried about where I was or what was happening to me. In his presence, I felt everything I had believed before to be irrelevant. He was all I needed. He spoke to me, but not with words. His voice resonated in my heart. "Tariq," he said, "I have seen your heart. You have been searching, doubting, living with uncertainty. But I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the answer you've been looking for." At that moment, I felt everything I had known to be true about Islam slipping away, like sand through my fingers. All of the doctrines, the prayers, the rituals, they seemed distant, irrelevant. I felt the pull to something greater, something more than I had ever known. This wasn't just a dream. This wasn't some hallucination. This was real, and it was undeniable. I wanted to stay. I wanted to surrender entirely to this presence, to this love. But then, as I lingered there, something shifted. Jesus looked at me with compassion, but his gaze was tinged with sadness. "Tariq, you must return," he said. "There is still much for you to do. Your journey is not yet over. You will carry this message, and your life will be transformed. You must go back and share the truth that you have found here." I felt a tremendous reluctance. How could I leave this peace? How could I walk away from the love that I had found in his presence? But at the same time, I knew this was my calling. I had a purpose. I was meant to be a witness to the truth he had shown me. Before I could say another word, I felt my body jerk. It was as though I had been yanked out of a dream, and my senses suddenly rushed back to reality. I could feel the coldness of the hospital bed beneath me, the beeping of machines in the background, the panic of the doctors trying to revive me. My heart had stopped. I had died. But now I was back, and everything was different. I opened my eyes to a world that no longer made sense in the way it once had. The knowledge that Jesus was the way, the truth, the life was no longer an abstract concept to me. It was a living reality. I felt his presence with me, even though I was no longer in that ethereal light. There was no turning back. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't deny the truth I had witnessed. Jesus was real, and he had saved me. He had reached into the very depths of my soul and pulled me back from death to give me a new life. I tried to sit up, but the nurses quickly rushed over, and I could hear their frantic voices asking me how I felt. "What happened?" one of them asked, trying to understand why I had suddenly revived. But I couldn't explain it. I didn't have the words for the experience I had just had. How could I? How could I explain that I had been face to face with the Savior of the world, that I had died and returned with the knowledge that everything I had believed up until that point was a lie? I looked around the room and saw my wife, Amina, pacing nervously. She was beside herself with worry, not knowing what had happened. And in that moment, I realized that the hardest part of this transformation was yet to come. I had returned from death with a new truth in my heart, but how could I tell the people I loved? How could I share the incredible revelation I had received when everything I had believed had just crumbled? The journey ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: I could never be the same again. The Jesus I had met in that moment of death was the truth, and I had been forever changed by him. The days that followed my experience felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed within me. I went through the motions of daily life, but I was never really present. I would wake up, go to work, spend time with Amina and the kids, but my mind was elsewhere, haunted by the memory of that place, the voice, the being. I kept asking myself the same question: what did it all mean? Amina noticed I wasn't myself. She kept asking if something was wrong, if I was stressed. I wanted to tell her, but I couldn't. I didn't know how to explain what had happened to me. How could I tell her that my entire worldview had been shattered? How could I tell her that I was questioning the very core of what I had believed in for my entire life? One night after the kids had gone to bed, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, my mind racing. Amina was reading a book, oblivious to the storm swirling inside of me. I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to share my confusion, my fear, my doubts, but every time I tried, the words wouldn't come. The walls I had built around myself to protect my faith and my family were crumbling, and I had no idea how to rebuild them. Instead, I turned to Lucas. He had been there for me before, and his words, though foreign to me, were the only ones that offered any kind of peace. We met at a cafe one afternoon, and I couldn't contain myself. "Lucas," I said, "I've been having these thoughts. I'm not sure what to believe anymore. The things I thought were true about Allah, about Islam, now feel hollow. I had this experience, and it doesn't make sense. I don't know if I'm losing my mind." Lucas looked at me with the kindest expression, one that showed no judgment, only understanding. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Tariq, you're not losing your mind. What you're going through is real. I know it's hard, but sometimes God speaks to us in ways we don't understand at first. The truth you're seeking, it's not about being part of a religion. It's about knowing the truth of who Jesus is. Jesus didn't come to start a religion. He came to bring us life, to offer us a relationship with God." I felt a lump form in my throat. Could this really be true? Could it be that simple? Could Jesus be the answer I had been searching for, the answer that transcended everything I had known? But even as the thought crossed my mind, guilt washed over me. My heart ached for my family, my community. How could I betray the faith I had known my whole life? How could I turn my back on everything my parents had taught me, everything I had believed was true? The shame was suffocating. Back at home, the tension between Amina and me grew. She could tell something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to share the full extent of my internal struggle. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, she turned to me with concern in her eyes. Tariq, you've been distant. Is there something you're not telling me? She asked softly. I looked down at my plate, unable to meet her gaze. I didn't want to lie to her, but I didn't have the words to explain what I was going through. I had always been the strong one, the one who had all the answers. Now, I felt lost. I'm just confused, Amina, I whispered. I've been thinking a lot about faith, about everything, and I don't know what I believe anymore. Amina's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean, Tariq? Are you saying you don't believe in Allah anymore? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. No, I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to admit it to her, not yet. It's not that simple, I replied, my voice shaky. I'm just trying to understand. I don't know what's real anymore. Amina's face hardened with worry. Tariq, this is dangerous. You're doubting everything we've built. You're questioning our life, our children, everything. Her voice was trembling with emotion. Please, don't let this pull you away from us, away from Allah. Her words stung. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing me, of losing our family's faith. I felt that fear too, but something deeper, something more urgent was pulling at my heart. I had to keep searching for the truth, no matter how painful the journey might be. The next day, I found myself standing in the mosque, surrounded by the familiar faces of my community. But it felt different now. The prayers, the verses from the Qur'an, the sense of unity, all of it felt distant, foreign. I felt like a stranger in my own faith. How could I continue to live a life that no longer felt true to what I had experienced? I tried to push the doubts away, to silence the voice in my head that kept whispering, "There is more," but they only grew louder. Later that evening, I sat alone praying to Allah. "Please," I whispered, "show me the truth. Help me understand what's real." But in that moment, I didn't just hear my own voice. For a fleeting second, I felt the presence of something else, something not of this world. It was like a whisper in my soul, a still, small voice saying, "The truth is here. It's always been here." I couldn't explain it, but I knew what I had to do. I wasn't sure where the path would lead, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to explore what this truth meant, and it was leading me to something far beyond Islam. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when everything changed. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm brewing inside me. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a worn Qur'an in front of me. I had spent hours that morning reading through verses, trying to find some sort of peace, some answer to the chaos that had overtaken my mind. But the words felt distant, like echoes of a past life. Amina had left the house with the kids, and for the first time in weeks, I was alone. Completely alone with my thoughts. I could hear the rain pounding against the windows, and for a moment, I felt like the world outside was as far away as the life I had once known. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the figure from my near-death experience. The being of light, the voice, the overwhelming love. It was like a shadow I couldn't escape, lingering just behind my thoughts. I had been avoiding Lucas's calls for days. I didn't want to hear any more about Jesus. I didn't want to admit that his words had begun to stir something inside me. Yet on this rainy day, something shifted. I couldn't keep running from the truth any longer. I had to face it. I had to know what it all meant. That afternoon, I found myself in my living room, kneeling in prayer. Not the formal prayer I had practiced all my life, but a raw, desperate plea for understanding. "Allah," I whispered, my voice trembling, "please show me the truth. I don't know what to believe anymore. I need your guidance. If you are real, show me." I closed my eyes, but nothing happened at first. Just silence, and then the stillness was broken by a strange warmth that filled the room, as though the air around me was charged with a presence I could not explain. A sense of peace settled over me, but it wasn't the peace I was used to. This felt different, deeper, more profound. Suddenly I felt as though I was no longer alone. A voice, gentle and kind but firm, filled my mind. It wasn't an audible voice, but a presence I could sense in my very being. It was as if this voice reached into the depths of my soul, speaking directly to the core of who I was. "Your search for the truth has led you here," the voice said, "but the truth is not in what you've known, not in the path you've walked. The truth is in the one who loves you deeply, beyond all measure." I froze. The voice wasn't Allah's. It wasn't the voice I had been taught to listen for, but it was unmistakably divine. It felt like a truth that cut straight through the layers of my doubts, straight through all the walls I had built around myself. The voice continued, "Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. In him, you will find the peace and freedom your heart longs for." Tears sprang to my eyes as the words washed over me. I didn't understand it. I couldn't reconcile what I was hearing with everything I had been taught. My whole life I had been told that Jesus was merely a prophet, not the Son of God. The voice, however, was crystal clear. The love I felt was unlike anything I had ever known, more real, more complete than the faith I had once followed. My heart raced as the room around me seemed to fade. I wasn't sure if I was still in my body or if I was experiencing something beyond it. In that moment, the weight of everything I had been carrying, my doubts, my guilt, my confusion, seemed to lift, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. But then, as quickly as the peace arrived, doubt crept in. Could I really accept this? Could I truly believe that Jesus, a figure I had never fully understood, was the key to the truth I had been searching for? I had grown up believing that to stray from Islam was to lose my soul forever. Could I really turn my back on everything I had been taught, on everything my family stood for? I didn't know. But I knew that what I had experienced, this encounter, this revelation, was real. It felt more real than anything I had ever felt in my life. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was a truth that resonated with my entire being. The voice spoke again, this time more softly. "Your heart has always sought me, Tariq. It has always known the truth. Now, let that truth lead you to peace." When the vision faded, I found myself back in the living room, my hands shaking and my chest tight with emotion. The storm outside had stopped, but inside, the storm raged on. I didn't know what to do with this revelation. How could I reconcile the deep, undeniable truth I had just encountered with the life I had built around my faith? I thought about Amina and the children. What would they think if they knew what I was experiencing? Could I even share this with them? I couldn't bear the thought of losing them, but I knew I had no choice but to follow the path that had been revealed to me, no matter where it might lead. Before I could process the whirlwind of emotions that had just overwhelmed me, my phone rang. It was Lucas. I hesitated for a moment, but then I answered. "Tariq," he said, his voice calm, "I've been praying for you. I know you're struggling with this, but I want you to know, you're not alone. What you're feeling is real. Jesus is with you. He's calling you. I believe this is the beginning of something incredible." For the first time, I didn't feel alone. The peace that had filled me moments ago settled again, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning of my journey. The truth had been revealed to me, and now it was time to walk the path that would lead me to it. In the days following the revelation, I was lost in a whirlwind of emotions. The peace I had felt in that moment of divine clarity was slowly being replaced by confusion, guilt, and fear. I couldn't deny the truth of what I had experienced, but it felt like I was stepping into a completely new world, a world that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had always prided myself on being a strong, confident man, the pillar of my family. But now I felt like a stranger in my own skin. The once unwavering faith that had guided me throughout my life now seemed fragile, like glass that could shatter with the slightest pressure. I had no idea how to reconcile what I had learned with the life I had built. Amina noticed the change immediately. She had always been the calm one, the steady presence in our home, but now even she was struggling. One evening, after dinner, she sat down beside me, her eyes filled with worry. I could see the confusion and hurt in her expression, and I knew that I couldn't hide it from her any longer. "Tariq," she said softly, "I don't understand what's going on. You're not the same. You've been distant, almost like you're not even here with us anymore. Is this about your doubts? What's happening to you?" I didn't know how to answer her. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat. How could I tell her that everything I had believed, everything we had shared, was no longer enough? How could I explain that I had experienced something so profound, so undeniable, that it had shattered my entire perception of faith? "I don't know what's happening, Amina," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm confused. I don't know what I believe anymore. The things I've always thought were true about Allah, about Islam, now feel so distant. It's like I'm seeing everything with new eyes, and I don't know where it's leading. Her face grew pale as she tried to process my words. But you can't just give up on everything, Tariq. Our family, our children, our faith, this is who we are. You can't turn your back on that. We've been through so much together. What about us? What about our future? The pain in her voice hit me like a physical blow. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing me, of losing everything we had built together. I wanted to reassure her, but I didn't know how. How could I make her understand that this wasn't just a passing doubt? This was something deep, something life-changing. I'm not turning my back on you, Amina, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not turning my back on our family, but I can't ignore what I've experienced. I can't ignore the truth that's been revealed to me. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. This isn't just about you, Tariq. This is about our family. Our children are growing up in this faith. How can you change everything now? Don't you see what this will do to them? I felt a pang of guilt. The thought of how my doubts and my journey might affect our children tore at my heart. I had always wanted to be a strong role model for them, to guide them in the path of righteousness. Now I was questioning everything I had taught them, everything I had believed in. How could I do this to them? But there was a deeper truth calling to me, one that I could no longer ignore. I knew I couldn't continue living in denial. I had to explore this truth, even if it meant risking everything. As the days passed, I began to withdraw even more from Amina. I couldn't look her in the eye without feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. Every time she asked me what was going on, I could only offer her silence or vague reassurances. It wasn't that I didn't love her. I loved her more than anything in the world. But I knew that I was walking a different path now, one that she didn't understand, and I wasn't sure how to bring her with me. Lucas continued to be a source of comfort during this time. We met regularly, though I could tell that his excitement about my journey was slowly turning into concern. He had been patient with me, offering me support and understanding without pushing too hard. But I could feel that he was starting to wonder whether I was truly ready for the path I was on. One afternoon, as we sat at a cafe, Lucas looked at me with a mixture of compassion and concern. Tariq, I know you're struggling, and I don't want to push you too hard, but I also know that this isn't something you can ignore. This is a call to something much greater than yourself. Jesus is inviting you into a new life. I know it's hard, but don't let fear hold you back. His words hit me like a wave, washing over me with both comfort and trepidation. I had felt that call. I had felt it in my soul, like an undeniable pull towards something bigger than myself. But the fear, the guilt, the uncertainty, it was all so overwhelming. How could I accept this new truth and abandon everything I had known? At home, the tension between Amina and me reached a breaking point. One evening, after a particularly strained dinner, Amina stood up and walked toward me. Tariq, I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you fall away from our faith. I don't know who you are anymore. You've become a stranger to me. Her words were like daggers in my heart. I had never imagined this would happen, never imagined that my doubts would push us to this point. But I knew that there was no turning back now. The truth that had been revealed to me was too strong to ignore. I had to follow it, even if it meant losing everything I had once held dear. The days following my confrontation with Amina were a blur. I felt the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, every moment filled with the heaviness of a choice I couldn't undo. My heart ached for her, my beloved wife, the mother of my children, who had always stood by me. But now, she was a stranger in a way. I could feel her fear and confusion pulling her away from me, as if we were drifting apart on separate currents, unable to find our way back to each other. But there was no going back. I couldn't ignore what had been revealed to me, no matter how painful the journey ahead would be. I spent most of my time in solitude, contemplating everything I had been taught about Islam, comparing it to the new truths I had come to believe about Jesus. I found myself reaching out to Lucas more often, drawn to his calm, unwavering faith. He had been a guide to me, but even now, I felt torn. Part of me wanted to lean on him completely, to walk away from everything I had known, but another part of me still clung to my past. The teachings, the family, the community. It was like trying to pull myself out of quicksand, knowing that the harder I fought, the deeper I seemed to sink. One evening, after a particularly difficult phone call with Amina, I received an unexpected message. It was from my older brother, Idris. He had sensed that something was off with me and, as usual, he felt the need to step in. Idris had always been the protector of the family, the one who kept everyone together, the one who was the model of everything a good Muslim man should be. His message was short, but it made my stomach drop. "Tariq, I need to talk to you. Something is wrong." The last thing I wanted was to face him. Idris was a man of strong beliefs, unyielding in his faith. The thought of him confronting me, questioning my beliefs, was more than I could handle. Yet, I couldn't ignore the pull to meet him. I knew that avoiding him would only make things worse. We arranged to meet at a cafe near his office, and when I walked in, I saw him immediately, sitting at the far end, his back straight, his expression serious. His eyes narrowed as I approached, and I knew from the moment we made eye contact that the conversation would not be easy. "Tariq," he said, his voice low and firm, "I've been hearing things. People in the community are talking. They say you've been having doubts, that you've been questioning Islam. Is this true?" I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to deny it, to say everything was fine, but I knew that would be a lie. Idris knew me too well. He could see through any facade I put up. "I'm struggling, Idris," I admitted, my voice faltering. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Something happened. I can't explain it, but it's changed everything for me." His face hardened, and he leaned forward. "I understand that you're going through a hard time, but you can't just abandon your faith like this. This is who you are, Tariq. This is who we are. What happened to you? Did someone lead you astray? Are you being misled by someone?" I hesitated, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. "It's not about being misled," I said slowly. "It's about something that happened to me, something real. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." Idris stood up abruptly, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "You're throwing away your entire life, Tariq. Our family's honor, your children's future, everything we've worked for, it all comes down to this. Are you really going to abandon your faith for some fleeting experience?" His words cut deep, deeper than I could have imagined. He was right in so many ways. What would it mean for my children, for my place in the community, my family, my reputation? Everything was at risk, and yet there was this burning truth inside me that refused to be silenced. It wasn't a fleeting experience. It was real. And as much as I wanted to turn it off, to pretend it didn't happen, I couldn't. "I'm not abandoning anything," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I'm searching for the truth, Idris, and I've found something that feels more real than anything I've known." He looked at me with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You've lost your way, Tariq. I can't stand by and watch you destroy yourself. The community will hear about this, and you'll be cast out. Don't say I didn't warn you." The words stung, but they didn't break me. They felt like chains trying to pull me back into a life I could no longer embrace. I had felt the love and truth of Jesus, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it remained. It was part of me now. As I left the cafe that evening, the weight of Idris's words echoed in my mind, but another thought clung to me just as strongly. I wasn't alone in this. I had Lucas, and I had the truth I had encountered. And somehow that was enough to keep moving forward, despite the storm raging around me. Back at home, things were no better. Amina was growing more distant, and I could feel the strain in the air. The love we once shared seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a silent tension. The kids didn't understand, of course, but they could sense the change. The family dinners, the simple moments of joy we once had, felt like they were being replaced by a void, a space I couldn't fill, no matter how hard I tried. The longer this went on, the more I realized that the journey I was on wasn't just about me. It was about everything I held dear: my family, my identity, my future. And the more I tried to move forward, the harder the world around me seemed to push back. In the days following my conversation with Idris, I found myself spiraling. There were moments when I wanted to crawl into a hole, escape from everyone, from everything. But no matter how much I tried to bury my head in the sand, the reality was that I was being pulled in two different directions. One toward the truth I had encountered, and the other toward everything I had been raised to believe. The house felt suffocating. Amina's silence cut deeper than any argument could. She would pass by me without a word, her eyes avoiding mine, as if pretending I wasn't there would make everything go away. It was as if I had become a stranger in my own home. The children, too, were growing more distant. They were young, but they could feel the change. They didn't understand why Daddy seemed so far away, but they knew something wasn't right. And then there was Lucas. I had begun spending more time with him, talking about my doubts and revelations. But even with him, I felt like I was walking on thin ice. Lucas was always supportive, always ready to offer scripture, to pray with me, but sometimes I caught the glimmer of concern in his eyes. He wanted me to embrace Christ fully, to let go of everything that had defined me, but I wasn't sure if he understood the cost of that choice. One evening, after a particularly long conversation with Amina, one that ended in silence, I texted Lucas asking if he could come by for a visit. He agreed, and within the hour, he was at my door. "Hey man, you okay?" Lucas asked as he stepped inside, his tone a mix of concern and warmth. He'd seen me at my lowest, but even now I felt the weight of my own brokenness around him. "I'm struggling," I said, my voice flat. I sat on the couch, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on me. It's like no matter where I turn, I'm losing something. My wife, my family, my identity. I don't know how much longer I can keep holding on. Lucas sat down next to me, his gaze steady and calm. "I know it's tough, but you're not alone in this, Tariq. God's got you. And Amina, she's gonna see it too. She just needs time. I don't know if she'll ever understand." I replied, my voice breaking. "I can't make her see what I've seen, what's happened to me. And now it feels like every day we're further apart." It wasn't just Amina anymore. It was everyone. Idris, my old friends, the community. The more I shared my experience, the more I felt isolated. I wanted to explain it all, but words couldn't capture the depth of what had happened to me. They wouldn't understand. They couldn't. As I sat there with Lucas, I felt the gravity of the decision I was facing. Every choice I made now would affect my future in ways I couldn't predict. The thought of losing my family, the love I had shared with Amina, the shared history, the sacred bond we'd built, was a burden I didn't know how to carry. "I'm scared, Lucas," I confessed. "I'm scared of losing everything. I've already lost Amina. If she can't see what I see, how can I keep going? What if I'm wrong?" Lucas looked at me, his expression gentle. "I can't tell you what the future holds, Tariq, but I know what's true. God's grace is bigger than any fear, any doubt, and sometimes you have to trust that He'll work things out, even when you don't understand." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But there were moments when doubt crept in, when the old voice of my upbringing whispered in my ear, telling me that I was being foolish, that I was turning my back on my roots, on my faith, on everything I had ever known. Later that week, I found myself at the mosque for the first time since my near-death experience. I hadn't planned on going. I wasn't sure why I was there. Maybe I hoped that being in the familiar space would help me make sense of everything. But as I sat in the prayer hall, listening to the imam's words, they felt hollow. His voice, once comforting, now sounded distant, as if he was speaking from a place I no longer belonged. As the congregation rose to pray, I stayed seated. My heart raced in my chest, and I could feel the eyes of others on me, the whispers, the judgment. I was still part of this community. My roots were here, my family, my identity. But now, everything felt alien. The words of the Qur'an no longer resonated with me the way they once did. I could feel my inner conflict pulling me in every direction at once. The next morning, Amina confronted me. "Why weren't you at the mosque, Tariq?" she asked, her voice laced with frustration. "This is what we've always done. You can't just abandon your faith." I looked at her, my heart heavy. "I'm not abandoning it, Amina. I don't know what to believe anymore. I've seen things, I've felt things. I don't know how to explain it, but it's changed me." She stood there, her face a mixture of confusion and hurt. "I don't understand you anymore. I don't know who you are, Tariq." Her words were like a dagger to my chest. For the first time, I felt completely alone. I wasn't sure who I was anymore either. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that this journey wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about losing everything I had once held dear. My faith, my family, my identity, all of it was being torn apart, piece by piece. And though I had found a new truth in Christ, the cost of that truth was greater than I ever could have imagined. The days after that conversation with Amina felt like a blur. The house was full of an unbearable silence, and even when we spoke, it felt like we were speaking a different language. I was trying so hard to hold on to the new truths I had discovered, but the weight of my past, the pull of my former life, was becoming more intense. Lucas continued to support me, but even he could sense the growing strain. He called me one evening, asking if I wanted to come over to his house. "Come get away from everything for a bit," he said. "You need some space." I agreed, needing the distraction. Lucas and I sat on his porch that night, the Texas heat heavy in the air, but the quiet of the evening offered a rare moment of peace. We talked about faith, about life after death, and about the new path I was walking. But as much as Lucas tried to be there for me, it wasn't enough to silence the voice inside my head. The doubts, the guilt, the fear, I couldn't escape it. I felt like I was teetering on the edge, caught between two worlds, and every step I took seemed to push me further from everything I had ever known. Then, one afternoon, as I was walking home from the local coffee shop, I was stopped by Idris. He had been distant lately, and I had wondered if he had given up on me. But he was standing in front of me now, his face serious, his eyes filled with a kind of urgency. "Tariq," he said, his voice low, "I need to talk to you. This is important." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Something about his tone made me uneasy. "Okay," I said, glancing around. "What's going on?" "Look, I've been talking to some of the brothers," he began, his eyes darting to the ground. "You've been acting strange lately, and Amina, she's not okay. She's worried about you, about your faith, about everything. And I have to be honest with you, man. You're heading down a dangerous path. You're losing touch with who you really are. I know what you're going through, but this isn't the way. I'm worried about your soul." His words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The air felt thick, heavy, like a storm was coming. "I'm just trying to understand, Idris," I finally managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. "I've seen things. I've felt things that can't be explained. It's like I've been given this glimpse of something greater, something beyond what I've known, and I can't ignore it." Idris stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "What if you're wrong? What if all of this is just a lie? What if you're letting something dangerous take root in your heart?" His words stung, and a part of me wanted to argue, to explain how deeply I'd felt the presence of Christ, how real it had all been. But the doubt began creeping back into my mind. Was I really seeing the truth? What if I was being deceived? What if this path was not leading me to salvation, but to ruin? Before I could respond, Idris turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the street, the weight of his words pressing down on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, each word becoming more tangled with my own fears and insecurities. I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing. What if Idris was right? What if I had been misled, pulled into something that would destroy my faith, my soul? And what about Amina? What about my children? The next morning, I received a call from Amina. Her voice was soft, almost broken. "Tariq, can we talk?" I agreed, and we met at a nearby park. She sat down beside me, her face drawn with worry, her eyes tired. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm losing you. You've changed, Tariq. You're not the man I married. You're not the father our children need. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I can't keep living like this." Her words cut through me, each sentence a sharp reminder of everything I stood to lose. My heart ached as I watched her struggle, as I saw the pain in her eyes. It was like watching the love of my life slip away, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, it felt like I was losing her, too. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Amina," I said, my voice shaking, "but I can't deny what I've seen, what I've felt. This truth, it's changed me. It's not something I can just turn off. I need you to understand that. I need you to trust that this is what I believe now." Amina shook her head. "I don't know how to understand this, Tariq. I don't know how to live with someone who doesn't believe in the same things I do. I can't be with you like this." Those words were a blow to my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My worst fear had come true. I was losing my family, losing the one person I had thought would always stand by me. As I left the park, I felt more alone than I ever had before. The path I was on, this journey of discovery, of awakening, was beginning to feel like a heavy burden, one that was costing me everything I had ever known. The fear, the doubt, the isolation were all closing in on me. Was it worth it? Was this truth worth losing everything? I had no answers, only the ache of an uncertain future. The days that followed the conversation with Amina felt like a blur of internal chaos. My world had been turned upside down, and it seemed that every step forward only led to more questions, more doubts. But despite all of that, there was a flicker of something that kept me moving forward. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it deep within me, a call, an invitation to something greater. I found myself reflecting more on my conversations with Lucas. He was the only person who seemed to understand the depth of my internal battle without judgment. In the weeks after Amina and I had spoken, Lucas invited me to a church service he had been attending, a small, tight-knit congregation that had been a source of strength for him during difficult times. I hesitated at first. What would Amina think? What would the community think? But something in me urged me to go, to seek something beyond my doubts, beyond the judgment. When I arrived, the warmth of the church community was unlike anything I had expected. The people there welcomed me with open arms, their smiles genuine and free from the skepticism I had feared. As the service began, I listened to the pastor speak about grace, about redemption, and about the love of Christ that transcended all things. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't the same peace I had felt when I was at the mosque, performing my duties, following the rituals. This peace was deep, personal, and unshakable. But as much as I was moved by the message, I couldn't ignore the growing tension at home. Amina became more distant with each passing day, and I could see the strain in her eyes. She had always been strong in her faith, and the rift between us was a painful reminder of the chasm I had created by embracing a new belief. My heart ached to see her suffering, but I couldn't deny what I had experienced, what I had come to know. One evening, after I had returned from church, Amina confronted me once again. "I see you going to that church, Tariq," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet pain. "I see you making all these changes, and I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I can't live in a house with someone who has turned their back on everything we've believed in." Her words stung, and I could feel the wall between us growing higher. My heart broke for her. This wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to tear apart our family, but it felt as though this journey I was on was leading me in a direction I couldn't avoid. "I'm not turning my back on you, Amina," I said, trying to hold back the tears. "I'm not turning my back on our family. But what I've seen, what I've experienced, it's changed me. I need you to understand that." "I can't understand it, Tariq," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "I've spent my whole life believing one thing, and now you're telling me that everything I've known is wrong. How can I understand that?" Her pain was real, and it mirrored my own. I had tried to explain the truth to her, but words were failing me. The gap between us felt insurmountable, and every attempt to reach across it only made the distance feel wider. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional weight of our situation became unbearable. I started confiding in Lucas more often, using our conversations as a way to cope with the growing tension at home. He continued to encourage me, to pray with me, to remind me of the grace that had been shown to me. But even Lucas could sense the deepening rift between Amina and me. "Tariq, you've got to give her time," Lucas told me one evening. "I know it's hard, but you can't force her to believe the way you do. This is your journey, not hers. She's going to need space to process it all, and you've got to respect that." I wanted to believe him, but the guilt gnawed at me. Every time I looked at Amina, I saw her pain. Every time I kissed my children goodnight, I wondered if I was destroying the very family I had worked so hard to build. What if this was the price of my spiritual awakening? What if I had to choose between my faith and my family? In the midst of this turmoil, something unexpected happened. Zainab, one of Amina's closest friends, reached out to me. She had been quiet about my transformation up until that point, and I had assumed she had been avoiding me. But one afternoon, she called and asked if we could meet. "I've been thinking a lot about you, Tariq," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I know this whole thing has been difficult for you, and I can see that you're struggling. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I want you to know that I've been praying for you." I was taken aback. Zainab had always been a quiet, kind-hearted woman, but hearing her speak about prayer and faith felt like a breath of fresh air. I didn't know what to say, but I could tell that she truly cared. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of comfort in someone's presence. "Thank you, Zainab," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I don't know what to do anymore. It feels like I'm losing everyone around me. Amina, the kids, my community. I don't want to lose them, but I can't deny what I believe." Zainab nodded, her eyes filled with compassion. "I can't pretend to understand everything you're going through, Tariq, but what I can say is that God doesn't want you to lose your family. Maybe this is just a season, a time for both of you to grow. Don't give up on your faith, but don't give up on her either." Her words felt like a balm to my soul, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of everything I had known. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new, something that could bridge the gap between my faith and my family. The days grew heavier, and the weight of my choices began to crush me. My faith in Christ was no longer just a personal matter. It had become a living, breathing force that reverberated through every part of my life. I had believed at first that my journey was about truth, about finding the answers to my deepest questions. But now, as the rift between me and Amina grew wider, I realized that it wasn't just about what I believed. It was about who I was willing to lose in the process. I sat in my study one night, staring at the Bible Lucas had given me. The words on the pages blurred as my mind drifted to the faces of my children, to Amina's eyes filled with sorrow and disbelief. In my heart, I knew that the path I was walking was not just mine. It was shared with the people I loved. The choices I made affected them, whether I wanted them to or not. And at that moment, I felt the cold grip of fear. What if I had made the wrong decision? What if the price of my salvation was too high? My thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. I opened it to find Amina standing there, her face pale and tight with emotion. "I need to talk to you, Tariq," she said, her voice sharp. "This can't go on anymore." I nodded, trying to steady my breath. I knew this moment was coming. I had known it for days, weeks, perhaps even longer. The gap between us had grown too wide, the tension too thick to ignore. "Please, come in," I said, stepping aside to let her in. Amina walked into the room, her eyes never leaving mine. The silence between us was suffocating. She stood in front of me, her arms crossed defensively. For a moment, it felt like the entire weight of the world rested on this one conversation. "Tariq, I've tried," she said quietly. "I've tried to understand. I've tried to be patient, to trust that this change in you is something real. But I can't keep pretending. This is tearing me apart. It's tearing our family apart." Her words struck me like a physical blow, and I felt my heart drop. I wanted to reach out to her, to explain that I hadn't chosen this path out of selfishness, but I couldn't find the words. "I didn't want this for us, Amina," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I didn't ask for this. But when I had that experience, when I saw the truth that was revealed to me, I couldn't deny it. I can't go back to what I was." She let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You don't get it, Tariq. This isn't just about you. It's about our children, our life together. You're throwing it all away for something that I can't even begin to understand." Her words stung, but they were laced with a truth I couldn't deny. My decision wasn't just affecting me. It was affecting everyone I loved. My children, who looked to me for guidance, for stability. Amina, my partner in life, who had walked with me through everything, now standing at the edge of a precipice, unable to cross over to where I had found myself. "I never wanted to hurt you," I said, my voice breaking. "But this is something I can't unsee. I've found something real, something that fills the emptiness I've felt all these years. And I believe, no, I know, that this is the way. I know it." Amina's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the woman I had married, the woman who had stood beside me through thick and thin. She had always been my strength, and now she looked so small, so broken. "You're asking me to follow you into something I can't understand," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're asking me to give up everything." my faith, my family, my community. I can't do that. I won't. I reached for her, but she pulled away, her chest rising and falling with sharp, ragged breaths. Amina, please, I pleaded. Don't leave me. I love you. I need you. But she shook her head, and in that moment, I knew. I knew that she wasn't just rejecting my faith, she was rejecting the person I had become. And I felt the weight of that rejection more deeply than anything else in my life. This isn't the man I married, Tariq, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know who you are anymore. The words echoed in my mind as she turned and walked away. Each step felt like a fracture, a break in the very foundation of my life. As she left, I sank to my knees, my hands trembling, my heart torn between the faith I had embraced and the family I had shattered. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions of daily life, but everything felt hollow. I tried to reach out to my children, to comfort them, but they, too, seemed distant, unsure of how to navigate the changing dynamics at home. It wasn't just Amina who was grieving. We were all grieving, and I was the cause of it. And yet, deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. My faith in Christ was unwavering, despite the pain, despite the sacrifice. But the toll it had taken on my family was undeniable. I had arrived at a crossroads in my life, and I could no longer pretend that the path I was on wouldn't have consequences. I had to decide, would I walk away from everything I knew to stay true to my faith, or would I abandon my beliefs to salvage my family? This was the critical moment, the choice that would define the rest of my life. The days after Amina's departure were the hardest of my life. It felt like everything I knew was unraveling at the seams. My faith, my marriage, my identity. Every morning I would wake up and feel a hollow emptiness in my chest. I missed Amina, I missed my children, and yet the truth I had seen in my NDE, what I had learned about Christ, would not let me go. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, choosing Christ over everything else, including the family I loved more than life itself. But each time I reached for my Bible, I felt a surge of peace that I couldn't ignore. I had never felt this certainty before, this deep knowing that I was on the right path, even if the world around me was crumbling. One evening, as I sat in the living room, Lucas called. His voice on the other end was warm, filled with concern, and yet there was an urgency in his tone that I couldn't ignore. Tariq, Lucas said, I know it's been rough, but you have to understand something. What you're going through is part of the journey. The tension, the struggle, it's all leading somewhere. You're being refined, shaped, and the pain you feel now will become part of your testimony. I don't know how much more I can take, Lucas, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Amina is gone, my children are distant, and I'm left alone with a truth that no one else understands. I feel like I've lost everything. Sometimes, the hardest moments come before the breakthrough, he said gently. But you can't go back, Tariq. You've seen the truth, you've experienced the love of Christ. No matter how hard it gets, don't let go of that. His words stuck with me, lingering like a beacon in the storm of my emotions. But the real test came the next day, when I received a call from Amina. My heart jumped when I saw her name on the screen, but my mind was clouded with fear. Was she calling to yell at me again? To tell me that I had made the biggest mistake of my life? Hello, I said, almost holding my breath. Tariq, she began, her voice soft and uncertain. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about you, about us. My heart raced as I listened, unsure of what would come next. I can't pretend anymore, she continued. I can't pretend that I understand what you're going through, but I see the change in you. I see the peace in your eyes when you talk about Christ. It's not something I can ignore. I don't know if I believe what you believe, but I can't deny what's happening in you. I sat in stunned silence, not knowing how to respond. Was this a moment of reconciliation, or just another attempt to make sense of a situation that was too big for either of us to handle? I don't want to lose you, Amina, I said, my voice trembling. But I can't change what I believe. I've seen the truth, and I can't unsee it. It's not just an idea anymore. It's a part of who I am. I know, she whispered, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. But you need to understand something, Tariq. You're asking me to walk a path I'm not ready for. I need time. I understand, I said, choking back the tears that threatened to overwhelm me. Take all the time you need. Just know that I love you and I'm here for you, no matter what." We ended the conversation with a promise to talk again soon. But in the silence that followed, I knew things had changed. This wasn't the end of my journey, and it certainly wasn't the end of Amina's. But we had come to a crossroads. She had seen my transformation, and I had witnessed her willingness to at least entertain the possibility that I was on the right path. That evening, I sat down with my children, who had been more distant than I had ever known them to be. Zainab and Idris were sitting together on the couch, not speaking, as if waiting for me to say something that might break the tension. "I need to talk to you both," I said, trying to sound calm, but the weight of everything was still heavy on my chest. "About what?" Zainab asked, her voice guarded. She was only 16, but her eyes reflected the maturity of someone far older. "I know this has been hard for you," I began. "And I know you probably don't understand what's happening right now, but I want you to know something. I am still your father. I love you both more than anything in this world, and nothing, not even my beliefs, will change that." "But you're not the same anymore, Baba," Idris said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're different. You don't pray like you used to. You don't act the same. It scares me." "I know, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I promise you the changes in me are for the better. I've found peace in a way I've never had before. I've found purpose, and I want you to find that peace too, but you have to trust me." There was a long silence before Zainab spoke, her voice soft but determined. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Baba, but I want to understand. I really do." And in that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't have all the answers. I couldn't fix everything with my newfound faith, but I could walk this path with integrity, with love, and with the hope that in time, those I loved would see the truth too. The days that followed felt like an unrelenting storm. Every decision, every conversation with Amina or the children felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between what I believed to be the truth and the life I once had. My faith in Christ remained steadfast, but the pain of what I had lost, Amina, my children, my old self, was a constant ache in my chest. It wasn't just the fear of rejection. It was the weight of knowing that the choice I had made would forever change the course of my family's life. Amina and I had stopped arguing. We didn't have the energy for it anymore. Instead, we lived in a quiet, aching distance. She was still trying to make sense of everything, and I, though resolute in my beliefs, could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes whenever we spoke. I wanted her to see what I had seen, to experience what I had experienced in that moment of grace when I felt Christ's presence so deeply that it was as if he had lifted me from the darkness I had been trapped in. But the rift was too wide, and the pain was too fresh. I wasn't sure if we could ever heal it, not if I continued down this path. And then, just as I felt like I couldn't carry this burden alone any longer, something unexpected happened. Something that felt like a divine intervention. It was a Sunday morning when I received the call from Lucas. His voice sounded frantic, yet there was an unmistakable note of urgency. "Tariq, you need to come to church today. Something incredible is happening," he said, his words urgent and breathless. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Just come. You'll see for yourself." Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, feeling a strange sense of anticipation gnawing at me. What could be so urgent? I had been to church before, but this felt different, like I was being pulled there for something greater. When I arrived, the church was buzzing with a low hum of excitement. People were gathered in small groups, some praying quietly, others speaking in hushed tones. I found Lucas near the front of the church, his eyes wide with excitement. Come quickly," he urged, grabbing my arm and leading me to the altar area. "It's happening." I followed him, confusion swirling in my mind. And then I saw it. Amina, standing near the altar, her face bathed in tears, her hands raised in prayer. At that moment, I froze. I had not expected her to be here. What was she doing here? Why was she praying? As if sensing my presence, Amina turned toward me, her eyes meeting mine. She looked different, her face radiant in a way I had never seen before. The walls of distance between us, which had seemed so impenetrable, seemed to melt away in the moment our gazes locked. "Come to me, Tariq," she whispered, as though our hearts were speaking the same language beyond the need for words. I stepped forward, my heart beating wildly in my chest. Amina, what's happening? I could barely form the words as the emotions swelled inside me. I don't know, Tariq. I don't know how, but I felt something. Something I can't explain. I felt God's presence in a way I've never felt before. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Amina, the woman who had questioned everything I had come to believe, was standing here, admitting that she had experienced something that mirrored my own transformation. It was as though everything I had prayed for, every tear I had shed, had led to this moment, this miraculous moment where Amina was beginning to understand what I had come to know. Lucas stepped back quietly, as if giving us space, but I could feel his presence, his prayers enveloping us both. And then, without warning, Amina collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Tariq," she whispered through her tears. "I've been so scared, so stubborn. I didn't want to lose you, but I see now that God was calling me all along. I don't have all the answers, but I want to walk this path with you. I want to find the truth just like you." And in that moment, everything else fell away. The years of struggle, the fear, the loss, all of it melted into a profound peace. I held Amina tightly, knowing that this wasn't the end, but the beginning. We had both been broken, but now we were being made whole again. But the journey wasn't over. This moment of reconciliation, this glimpse of divine grace, was only the beginning of the deeper work that God would continue to do in us. As Amina and I stood there, side by side, I knew that there was more ahead. There were more questions, more challenges, but we would face them together, united in the truth we were both discovering. And as I looked around the room, I saw the faces of my children, Zainab and Idris, watching from the back of the church, their expressions filled with uncertainty, but also something more, something like hope. As I stood there, holding Amina in my arms, I felt a peace unlike anything I had ever known. It was as if everything, the doubts, the struggles, the heartache, had all led to this moment. But what came next wasn't just a moment of reconciliation between Amina and me. It was something even deeper, a call to surrender everything, to fully embrace the transformation that had begun. The moment was still raw. Amina, tears streaming down her face, looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, awe, and an undeniable yearning for the truth. She was on the brink of understanding, but I knew the hardest part was still to come. She needed to make her own choice, just like I had. "Do you believe, Amina?" I asked softly, brushing her hair from her face. "Do you believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life?" Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I don't know if I'm there yet, Tariq, but I feel something inside me. A longing. A sense that I've been living in darkness and now there's light. I don't understand it fully, but I want to." In that moment, I knew that her journey had just begun, but it was a journey she would walk beside me now, not apart from me. The road ahead would be difficult. There would still be moments of doubt, of fear, and of resistance. But now we were united in the search for the truth, not just as a couple, but as individuals bound by a shared faith in Christ. The church began to hum with a new energy. People were praying, their voices rising in unison, and I realized that this wasn't just about us anymore. This was part of a larger story, a divine story unfolding right before my eyes. The air seemed charged with something holy, something transformative. I could feel it in my bones, in my soul. God's presence was all around us. Then, just as the intensity of the moment reached its height, a voice called out from the back of the church. It was Zainab. My daughter, standing there, her face a mirror of what I had felt so many months ago, confusion mixed with an open, searching heart. "Baba," she called, her voice trembling with a raw honesty I had never heard before. Is this real? What you found? What you believe?" I looked at her, and I saw the same uncertainty in her eyes that I had once felt in my own. It was the look of someone standing at the threshold, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. I walked toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. Zainab had always been the more logical of my children, the one who questioned everything. Her mind was sharp, her faith in the teachings of Islam firm. But now, there was something in her eyes that wasn't there before, a crack in her walls, a willingness to hear. "Zainab," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I can't answer all your questions, but what I can tell you is this. I have found peace, true peace. And I've found a love that's not of this world. It's the love of Christ. And no matter what, I will always love you. But you need to find this truth for yourself. Don't follow me blindly. Seek it out. Let God show you." She looked at me, her gaze softening. She didn't speak immediately, but I could see the battle waging within her. The same battle I had fought within myself not long ago. It was the battle between what we had known and what we were beginning to discover. As I stood there, watching her, something stirred in my heart. I had always been the protector of my family, the one who made the decisions, who kept everything together. But in that moment, I realized that the greatest gift I could give them was not my answers or my beliefs. It was the freedom to seek the truth for themselves. The freedom to wrestle with God, to ask the hard questions, and to find their own way to Him. And then Zainab did something I never expected. She stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, until she stood in front of me. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around me, holding me tightly. It wasn't just an embrace of a father and daughter, it was something more. It was the moment she began to open her heart to the possibility of Christ. "I'm scared, Baba," she whispered into my shoulder, "but I trust you, and I trust God." I held her tightly, tears streaming down my face. My daughter, my beloved Zainab, had taken the first step. In the distance, I saw Idris standing with Lucas. He was watching us, his face unreadable, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. I knew that soon he would ask his questions too, and when that time came, I would be there, ready to guide him. As I looked around the room, I saw Amina, Zainab, and Idris, my family, my loved ones, standing together in a moment of quiet unity. The tension, the fear, the doubt, they hadn't disappeared, but they had been replaced by something far more powerful, the hope of redemption, the promise of grace. It was then that I realized that this was my true calling, not just to find the truth for myself, but to share it, to live it out in a way that others could see, could feel, could understand. This was the beginning of a new life, not just for me, but for my family, and for anyone who might come to know Christ through our journey. The days that followed felt like a dream, as if the intense emotions and powerful revelations of the past weeks were too vast, too life-altering to fully comprehend all at once. It wasn't until much later that I could look back and truly understand the depth of what had taken place, not just in my own heart, but in the lives of those I loved. Amina, Zainab, Idris, and I were different now. We had walked through the fire of doubt, pain, and confusion, and emerged on the other side with something more precious than we could have imagined. It wasn't just about faith or doctrine anymore. It was about a relationship with Jesus Christ, a relationship that had transformed me from the inside out and was beginning to do the same in my family. Amina and I had spent hours talking, our conversations shifting from skepticism to genuine curiosity and a longing to understand God's love in a deeper way. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when old doubts crept in, but we faced them together. The peace I had felt in Christ was beginning to take root in her heart as well. As for Zainab, the transition was slower. She was still grappling with the weight of everything that had happened, the cultural shifts, the religious conflict, and the realization that everything she had believed about life and faith was now being questioned. But I could see the change in her eyes, the same longing for truth that had once pulled me toward Christ, now burning brightly in her. Idris, too, had been watching, listening, and questioning. He hadn't yet fully embraced the faith, but I could see that the seed had been planted. There were moments of quiet reflection in his eyes, moments when I knew he was wrestling with God, asking the hard questions that I too had once asked. And just like me, I knew he would find his way when the time was right. Through all this, I began to realize that the journey was never truly about finding the right answers or having all the right beliefs. It was about being open to God's voice, being willing to trust that He would guide us, even through the darkest moments of our lives. What had begun as a painful process of questioning and transformation had turned into a story of grace, redemption, and hope, a story that was still unfolding. I was no longer the man who had been bound by the chains of rigid belief, the man who had once lived in fear of being judged by his family or community. I was free, free to love, free to live, and free to share the incredible grace I had found with those around me. As I stood in the quiet of my home, watching Amina and the children, my family, sitting together and talking about God's love, I realized that this was the true miracle. It wasn't just my own redemption. It was the way God had brought my family into this new understanding of truth, of peace, of salvation. But there was still work to do. The journey wasn't finished. Each day, we continued to walk in faith, sharing our story with others and inviting them to experience the love and peace we had found in Christ. We didn't have all the answers, but we had something even more powerful, the willingness to embrace the mystery of God's love and the certainty that He was with us, guiding us every step of the way. As I shared this story with you today, I want to leave you with a thought. Perhaps you too are questioning, searching, or feeling lost. Maybe you're in a place where the truth seems uncertain, where the road ahead feels impossible. But I want you to know that there is hope. There is a love that surpasses all understanding. There is a grace that can change your life, just as it changed mine. I encourage you, wherever you are on your journey, to keep seeking, keep asking the hard questions, and know that, just as He was with me, God is with you, ready to meet you where you are and lead you to the truth, to peace, and to a life of purpose. If you're watching this and your heart is stirred, if you're feeling the pull of God's love on your heart, don't ignore it. Embrace it. Seek out those who can help you on your journey, whether it's through prayer, reading the Bible, or simply reaching out to someone who has experienced the same transformation you're longing for. And if you're ready, take that step. Surrender. Let go of the doubts, the fears, the chains that hold you back, and embrace the grace that is waiting for you. Thank you for being part of this story. I pray that it has inspired you, challenged you, and helped you see that no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, God is always reaching out to you. Keep walking, keep searching, and most importantly, keep believing. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something deep within your heart, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on your own spiritual journey. Are you ready to embrace the truth, to step into the light of God's love? If so, take that next step today. And don't forget to share this story with someone else who may need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of transformation, and let's continue this journey together.